Have you no sense of decency, Senator? At long last, have you no sense of decency? Who said that? Let's see how much you people remember of American history. I remember watching that when it happened. It was Joseph Welch. Joseph Welch was a lawyer, and he was a lawyer representing the Army in the Army McCarthy hearings, where a tail gunner, Joe McCarthy, the big anti-communist, was doing an investigation of communism in the Army. And Joe McCarthy was running around the country calling anybody and everybody with whom he disagreed, calling them communists and guilt by association, and he was just ruining people's reputations. And the House Un-American Activities Committee was doing it at the same time. I was a kid. I'd say my disgust with the Republican Party stems from those days. And ironically, the Army this was when Eisenhower was president, as you all well know. It was 1954. And Eisenhower was a Republican, but he was nothing like today's Republicans, I can tell you right now. Eisenhower would want nothing to do with these bums. But Joe McCarthy, he'd have been a Republican, he would have been a Trump, or he would have been Trump's, he would have been his vice president, he would have been his secretary of commerce, he would have been everything in that department. He would have pushed Elon Musk out of the way, and Trump would have said, I love you, Joe McCarthy, because you're just like I am. You don't give a damn who you hurt. You don't give a damn who you hurt. And that's what that well-known remark, and this is when Joseph Welch went on to star in movies. He was in, what was that movie about the murder that took place in Traverse City, Michigan? I'll think of it a little while. But anyway, he was the judge. He played the judge in that case, in that movie. And Anatomy of a Murder. Great movie. Took place in Traverse City, where I later worked driving a bus. I worked as a camp counselor in that area, and loved it. Beautiful area. But it was that Joseph Welch. And you know whose attorneys were for McCarthy at the time? Bobby Kennedy and Roy Cohn. Now, Roy Cohn went on to be one of the crookedest, rottenest lawyers ever, and he was Donald Trump's lawyer. He was Donald Trump's father's lawyer. Bobby Kennedy, in a dramatic moment during those hearings, got up, left his seat with the McCarthy team, and went over and sat with the Army because he was so disgusted with that behavior. But Joe McCarthy was making a living, and incidentally, I'm going to digress. My father hated Joe McCarthy. You know why? More than anything? Not just his politics, not just the way he went after people, because Joe McCarthy was telling people he was a tail gunner in World War II. I have my dad's memoirs from World War II. My dad was the lead bombardier and navigator flying missions over Sicily. And he's a line he never discussed, never talked about these things, but I found his personal memoirs after he died. And in there he has a description of his plane was attacked by a bunch of German fighter pilots. And when they landed, my dad, of course, was in charge of the whole squadron. He went back, and there was the tail gunner, riddled with machine gun bullets. The tail gunner. You know, the tail gunner. Joe McCarthy, tail gunner Joe, they used to call him. Never set foot in one of those bombers. Here's the tail gunner. And my dad's, you could almost hear my dad crying through the pages, through the years, through the decades, as he had to dig that poor man's body out of that plane. He had to dig what was left of his body out of that plane. So when Joe McCarthy was running around calling himself a tail gunner, my dad it made him sick to his stomach. So that's why I don't like the Republican Party, because the Republicans didn't stand up to Joe McCarthy. They kept him going until finally Joe McCarthy, right after that, he fell apart emotionally. He showed up on the floor of the Senate drunk, and eventually he was actually kicked out of the Senate. But what a bum. And he had the nerve to have an Irish name. I think he just adopted that name. So anyway, so now we've got, fast forward to Donald Trump. And in particular, what's going on with that poor guy. They got dragged out of Maryland, stuck in that disgusting jail down in El Salvador. And it was intended for the worst of the worst, and he's down there with the worst of the worst, and this guy did not deserve to be there. They admitted it themselves in court. They had to, because he was here legally. He had a wife and kids, and And so I watched these two smug little pricks, pardon my language. I don't think kids watch this anyway. You're a little bit too, forget it. I don't care. A couple of smug little pricks. Donald Trump sitting next to the president of El Salvador, both of them smirking as they're asked about this guy in the jail in Salvador. You know what that little prick from Salvador said? He said, well, I can't send a terrorist across the border into the United States. And here's sitting right next to him is the president of the United States with a big smirk on his face. The only reason that guy couldn't send somebody back across the border to the United States is because Trump wouldn't let him. And all Trump had to do was say to the guy, hey, send the guy back. We're paying you to keep these guys in jail. That was a mistake there. Just put them on a plane and send them back. We'll pay for it. Instead of that, Trump turns to this reporter and says, you should be thanking me and asking about, don't you feel better that we're keeping all these bums out of the United States, kicking all these terrible criminals and heading us out of the state? No, it's about every single person is an individual and they're entitled to have individual rights. One of rights of which the Supreme Court just finished telling this jerk is these people have a right to be heard. They're entitled to due process. You can't just grab them off the street like they did that young lady from Turkey. Grab these people, the students, just grab these people off the streets to give them no opportunity to be heard, label them as terrorists with no evidence, and of course all the damn right-wingers are that say, yeah, they're terrorists, they're no damn good. Why? Because Trump said so? The pathological liar? If this doesn't make you mad, there's something wrong with you. This should infuriate you to watch those two smug little pricks talking about this kid who's in jail for having done nothing wrong and a complete screw up by this administration that refuses to do anything and sits there and says, I can't tell the people in Salvador what to do. And the president of Salvador says, well, I can't send this guy back to the country and back to the United States. Our hands are tied. The president of El Salvador and the president of the United States who orchestrated this whole disgusting event, their hands are tied. They can't do a damn thing about it. Well, if you buy that for 2 minutes, then there's something wrong with you. Everybody in this country should be furious at what they're doing to another human being. Mr. President, presidents, have you no sense of decency? At long last, have you no sense of decency? Joe McCarthy is alive and well in this country, unfortunately.